This lecture continues Islamic art in the later period, and especially traces the rise of the Ottoman Empire. The Caliphate is going to disintegrate in the 9th century. With this lack of centralized cohesion, power in the Islamic world fragments and regional rulers take over. This is further exacerbated in the 13th century when the Mongols invade under Genghis Khan. This further fragments the already fragmented Islamic leaders. At Cairo, we see the effects of later Islamic architecture, which adds increasingly complex additional building types to the repertoire that will appreciate surface decoration and will now draw attention to the leaders that build the structures. The Black Death that sweeps across Asia into Western Europe and North Africa in 1348 is going to begin in China. This decimates Europe's population as it spreads from Constantinople to Africa. The funds for many plague victims in Cairo are going to be used to build new monumental structures by the surviving sultans. An example of this for Sultan Hassan would be the Madrasa Mausoleum Mosque complex that he builds between 1356 and 63, with the funds taken from confiscated lands of plague victims. Here we have an introduction to the new four-iwan plan, which is used in this later period to build schools, palaces, and mosques, whereby we find a central courtyard frames 4-iwans, or large vaulted halls with arched openings left open to the sky. In this example, we have the mausoleum of the Sultan seen domed here in the upper left section, as well as a madrasa or college, and of course a mosque. All are brought together here in this complex. The madrasa is actually going to be located where the 4-iwans are, 3 dedicated to classrooms and dormitories off to the side, with the 4th iwan being dedicated to the main mosque. The Sultan's mausoleum is here domed, and when the Muslim tradition we find that domes are associated with burial places and effigies. This is how the Venetians at San Marco will adopt this idea for their own saint, who is going to be interned there. The mosque is going to be the main iwan that we will look at here in this new approach to architecture, which is hypaethral or open to the sky. The central courtyard is going to illustrate this new approach that Muslim architects are going to appreciate, and that is a shift to a continuous open space, uninterrupted by supports, which is the opposite of mosques seen earlier in the Islamic age from the 7th century until the Black Death, where we find hypostyle halls are the most common, whereby we have forests of columns. Now it is left open, completely uninterrupted by supports. The main iwan is going to be set aside for the mosque that also does not block our space by way of columns or these arcades. The Qibla wall here with mihrab and minbar is going to show how in this later era Islamic architects and artisans will adopt increasingly complex designs, including the Mamluk glass in these glass lamps here hanging from the ceiling. The Mamluk panels as well sharply contrast with the marble, where we find Kufic script or Arabic script in a particular typeface is going to be above the mihrab niche, referencing paradise in the Arabic around it, excerpt from the Quran. Here we have this blocky angular script that is very graphic and is going to be adopted for the official style of Muslim writing in monuments. The joggled voussoirs, or interlocking marble joints, are going to become increasingly complex as we move into the later period. Now, instead of very simply interlocking, they are going to become very complex, almost jigsaw-like designs. These are carved separately and very carefully inserted into one another. This is very different from the simplistic tiles and triangles and rectangles that decorate these diamond shapes at the back of the mihrab niche before. Also at the Sultan Hassan Madrasa Mausoleum Mosque Complex, we have an example of Mamluk glass, which was developed with a very elegant thin vessels, such as these lamps here. Now, the glass oil lamp, seen here by Ali ibn Muhammad al-Bakami, is going to be made in Cairo, Egypt, between 1329 and 35. It is made of brown glass and polychromed with enamel and gold. The blue, red, and gold enamel is affixed to the glass and is reheated in order to fuse it into it. It is signed by the artist below, asking for God's protection of him. At the top, we have a verse taken from the Quran. That's going to be the book Surah 24:35, which states, "God is the light of the heavens and the earth. His light might be compared to a niche that enshrines a lamp, the lamp within a crystal of star-like brilliance." Obviously appropriate for a lamp in pulling this particular verse, just like that of the lusterware and plates last time relating to food. On this, we have a blazon. A blazon is going to identify the commissioner as a cupbearer to the Sultan, so we know who paid for this based on the familial identifier. This is going to be common, and during the Crusades, this practice is brought back to Europe and eventually evolved into heraldry that we understand today, and heraldic devices such as the cartouches with the symbols of different families in Europe. Turning to palace design and palatial estates, we have in Granada, Spain, surviving the last Islamic dynasty. That is the Nasserids, the Spanish Muslim dynasty to end when in 1492 Christians finally reclaim Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, for themselves. The Palace of the Lions at Alhambra, Granada, is going to be a very defensible position and was left intact when Christians reclaimed this area because it is not a religious structure and they appreciated it for its very elaborate decoration and to show that they were superior to the civilization that created it. This hilltop site of an early Islamic fortress is going to be left here because the Christian invaders appreciated the aesthetics. This was the private retreat of Sultan Muhammad V, who will come here to be entertained by musicians and have grand banquets. Here we find the courtyard of the Lions, where we find the palace gets its name. We have here a central fountain with 12 lions, which for Christians would be associated with the 12 apostles in a baptismal font, another reason to spare the destruction of this given palace. The beauty of the palace, you can see from the decorations around the edges, comes from a very elaborate set of carvings that appear to look like stalactites. These are known as Muqarnas, or small niche-like components that hide the transition from vertical to horizontal planes. In these formations, carved individually and then inserted into place here, you still see the Kufic script along the base of these columns. They're called, once again, Muqarnas because they look like these stalactites in caves. We find the best use for these Muqarnas in a Muqarnas dome in the hall here of the Palace of the Lions in the south side of the court, where a winter reception hall and music room demonstrates that they are excellent for acoustics, and this geometric complexity merely plays to that end. Much like a recording studio today, sound does not vibrate off of or echo from the sides of the walls. It is absorbed into these stalactite-like formations. Looking up into the Muqarnas dome, we have this star shape that conceals the transition from the walls to the dome itself. The star-shaped vault is honeycombed with clustered Muqarnas arches that alternate with the corner squinches, because this is built in the same engineering technology as Middle Byzantine churches, that by squinches will support the dome above. In this case, an 8-pointed star interpenetrated with 16 windows. Here we find that the squinch is still going to be the basis of engineering, where all four walls represent the sides, the base of this cube that supports the weight of the dome above. Therefore, it is like Hosios Lukas in the Catholicon, only now we are concealing the transition from the walls to the dome, instead of merely drawing one's eye upward with these repeated circular and square shapes, transitioning to heaven above. And of course, even in the Islamic tradition, domes still represent the dome of the heavens. Turning eastward to Samarkand, Uzbekistan, we have the capital of the Timurids, who ruled between 1370 and 1506 over a vast territory including modern-day Iran, Central Asia, Pakistan, and India. Now, the Timurid dynasty is going to be founded by Timur, or Tamerlane, as he is more popularly known in the West. He is a Mongol descendant who marries into Genghis Khan's family. Now, due to the Mongol invasions, this forced artistic exchange between these peoples, and they integrated Chinese, Persian, Turkic, and Mediterranean ideas into a Mongol base. Seen in examples like this, their architecture appreciates axial symmetry, double-shelled domes, modular planning, cobalt blue and turquoise, as well as white glazed ceramics. We find one of the most striking examples of this type of hybridization in the Shah-i-Zinda funerary complex in Uzbekistan, produced between the 14th and 15th centuries, and are primarily the tombs of the Timurid family, especially that of the princesses. It is arranged along an avenue around the tomb of Qatham, who is a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad and a saint himself. Here we find the facades are decorated with patterns and geometry and chinoiserie and or Chinese-like symmetry that is appreciated here. Here we find the interior space decorated in much the same way with the beautiful alternating blues. The modular planning seen in the Shah-i-Zinda funerary complex is going to be one with a dome on a square unit with blue glazed tiles that are easily identifiable in this region. The domes for these mausolea are going to be double-shelled and placed on high drums inscribed with Quranic verses in interwoven Kufic calligraphy, a very beautiful example of the use of Kufic script here. This is not unlike the Eastern mausolea that we have here for Diocletian, which was double-storied and had interior columns as well. If we look at the dome, the characteristic star shape is going to be carried on from the early to the later Islamic periods and spread throughout their vast empire. The 8-pointed stars found in Islam and adopted by them are not associated with the Star of David, but instead are related to astronomical observation. For they relate to the 4 points of northeast, southwest, and then the 4 different directions for the summer and winter solstices, thus, of course, relating to this type of study of astronomy. As is demonstrable by the Timurids, we have a cosmopolitan understanding in Islamic society where pilgrimage, trade, and these routes are well defined through a road network. Thus, we have an exchange of ideas that reaches from Asia to Western Europe. Here we have a Manai bowl that is going to show Bahramkur and Azada from Iran from the 12th and 13th century. Here we have a luxury ceramic ware in Manai ware, which is Persian for the word enamel. A multicolored ceramic overglaze painting is what makes these so valuable and desirable. In this example, we have a continuous narrative, or one that shows different episodes on the same space. It is a popular subject in Islam relating to Bahramkur, who is a very famous man from history, famous for his skills in hunting and love. Here we find him on a camel with his favorite consort Azada, who belittles his hunting skills and calls him out on his inability to fire arrows in a very efficient and direct fashion. Therefore, to prove his marksmanship, he pins the hoof in the ear of a gazelle who is lifting it to scratch, if one can see that down here. Azada is then trampled to death under the camel for mocking him and his prowess. The interest in decorating scenes relating to hunting and war is carried out throughout the Muslim world, and we find here is the most common type of figural decoration since there was a ban on religious iconography within iconism. The focus here is on surface decoration, not on depth and or moving us beyond an illusionistic picture plane, where we find horsemen, attendants, soldiers, and falcons are all going to be illustrated. We have running animals in the upper and lower sections moving in opposite directions. In the upper register, they move right to left. In the lower register, they move left to right. In between the figures, in what would be the negative space, we find this artist has added a series of overlapping vegetation and or vine-like scrolls to fill that in, drawing our attention to the surface, not letting us move beyond it. We find that in the West, the understanding of hunting and huntsmanship is going to be an aristocratic endeavor and associated with the upper class, because only those individuals who owned land were allowed to hunt on it. Therefore, we have the same associations in the East and the West. This is an upper class endeavor. Horsemanship means that you must own a horse and, of course, have gone through the training in order to master the beast, especially firing from horseback while it is galloping. The ornament is on the surface importantly and does not suggest pictorial depth. Therefore, it is in line with the earlier examples of surface decorations in domes, architecture, mosaics. From the Dome of the Rock to the Great Mosque at Cordoba, we draw the eye to the surface instead of moving beyond it. Now in manuscript illumination, we see how the same patterns can be reused in different media, where non-figural geometric designs will dominate and are going to be shown alongside calligraphic elements like Kufic script. This resembles court carpets because the same designers are going to put forth the central elements in these very complex overlapping starburst patterns. They are merely going to be carried out by artisans who either are going to be excellent manuscript illuminators, as seen here with this Quran frontispiece, or they can also be great weavers, carrying out the same designs for tapestries, carpets, and of course decorative elements on buildings. The exuberant ornament underlaid by the strict geometric organization is the same in manuscript illumination as it is in textiles and architecture, showing that we can crosswalk the designs to multiple media, making them relevant to these various structures. Now the 8-pointed star, we should point out, will be adopted by Islam as the dominant one, unlike the Star of David for Judaism, because the 8 points for the Muslims represent the directions of north, east, south, west, the cardinal directions, as well as those of the summer and winter solstices. Therefore, we have 8 points that represents the direction of the world and cosmography. Now, just because the Islamic world preferred this type of elaborate ornamental geometry does not mean they do not have figural decoration, as shown here in Kamal ad-Din Bizad and his Yusuf fleeing Zulyaka from a copy of the Bustan manuscript here in Afghanistan from around 1488. We demonstrate that pictorial imagery does exist, it just develops late in Islamic society. It never shows religious subjects in a literal fashion, but as in this example, it can allude to it in a poetic fashion. Here we have Yusuf and Zulaka, which relates to the Hebrew version of Joseph and Potiphar's wife, whereby we find that Joseph is approached by Potiphar to commit infidelity and he flees from the woman. This is not biblical, in fact, but instead is taken from a poet Jami's mystical version, where Zulaka is going to build a seduction palace for this specific encounter between her and Yusuf. As we see here, he is led from room to room where doors miraculously are locking behind him. The fire halo Joseph flees as God is going to be releasing him from this prison. The illogical presentation of the space might seem unusual to Westerners, but did not concern Islamic audiences in the slight, who appreciated the overlapping and very decorative ornamental tile-like design seen here in Kufic script. So therefore, we do have figural imagery, but it does not represent something specifically religious, and is tied instead to scenes of love, war, and hunting. Turning now to an empire that would spread to cover nearly all of those conquered by the previous Islamic caliphs and Islamic rulers. We have the Ottoman Empire. Beginning in 1299, they would spread throughout all of North Africa, into the Middle East, into Iran, Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Arabia, and even into Eastern Europe, being halted only by Christians at the very edge of this vast territory. In 1453, we know that the Ottoman Turks overthrow the Byzantines in Constantinople and convert their churches into mosques. When this happens, they also whitewash the interior from the mosaics, scraping them off, setting up massive discs with the name of Allah, Muhammad, and early caliphs on the inside. And they, of course, are going to make it appropriate for the worship of the Islamic faith. What they are impressed with, however, is the large dome that has a space uninterrupted by architectural supports. This is something that the Ottoman Turks will become obsessed with and try to compete with this civilization to show they're superior. Large interior spaces with uninterrupted supports had been achieved by Islamic architects earlier in the four-iwan plan, such as at the Sultan Hassan Madrasa Mausoleum Mosque complex. However, they are left open to the sky. They cannot surpass, as of yet, the size and expanse of the domes they come across with Byzantine architecture. It would be Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who at the height of Ottoman power goes through a massive building program on par with the Roman Empire and wishes to compete with the Eastern Byzantine Orthodox community to show that they surpass them. His chief architect Sinan, who was an engineer in his military campaigns, would develop these centrally planned mosques with massive domed interior spaces, making over 300 imperial commissions, but has yet to overcome and master the engineering principles behind the Hagia Sophia. It would not be until the son of this sultan at Edirne that we find Sinan finally surpasses the Hagia Sophia. In Edirne, Turkey, we have the Mosque of Sultan Selim, who is going to be the son of Suleiman. So now we have Suleiman's son, Selim II. This is going to be made when Sinan, the great architect, is 80 years of age, finally creating a work that is meant to be compared to the Hagia Sophia and best it. Now, the exterior, of course, makes one think of and reminds one of the Hagia Sophia, as we have a massive dome and radiating half domes off to the side, as well as the four massive minarets that are going to be at the four cardinal points or ends of this structure. The plan, however, reveals the difference between the Sultan Selim Mosque and that of Hagia Sophia. For we have a courtyard, as with all mosques, out front of the Sultan Selim Mosque, but the plan itself reveals that we do not have the longitudinal pull, as with Hagia Sophia. It is instead a truly centralized plan. The pull towards the apse is de-emphasized, hence of course it is more geometrically perfect, with the circle and square motif carried out, or the transition between the terrestrial sphere in the square below and the heavenly circle above. With a large, open, uninterrupted interior, we move away from the hypostyle hall plan, but still retain decorative elements of it, with the alternating white and red brick patterns from the Visigothic mosque at Cordoba. Now, the interior, of course, is going to be highly decorative in later Islamic art. We find that inspired by Hagia Sophia's open expanse, we have a dome that's going to be floating on a ring of light. We have many more windows that open up into the interior space to where we are bathed in illumination, bathed in the light of God that's present on the interior space. Looking above, we can even see how those joggled voussoirs that we saw in Cairo are going to be carried on in the various arches that lead our eye upward, ascending until we get to the dome of the heavens. The effect then is similar to that of the Hagia Sophia, with windows penetrating the base of the dome, with walls covered by windows, where we have a series of arches and arches that draw our eye upward and upward until we reach that circular section above. The joggled voussoirs carried on from this jigsaw-like pattern in increasing in complexity that is going to be seen in the decorations here. Above, we have a dome that is over 102 feet in diameter, larger than that of the Hagia Sophia, which the architect Sinan boasted, because that is the touchstone that he is comparing this to. The decorative elements continued, those joggled voussoirs off to the side, and with increasing complexity we have vine-like scrolls and arabesque whiplash patterns around Kufic script, centered on the dome above. The outside is going to show us how the lightness, the airiness of the dome comes from the number of windows that penetrate the walls and the base of the dome here, concealing these transitions. Looking above, we have, again, seemingly two distinct or different ways in which to suggest or show heaven. Yet, we still have the Islamic and or Kufic script that spells out from the Quran the name of God describing paradise. And in the Byzantine alternative, we are showing God in paradise. Therefore, we have a different visual language to communicate the same thing in these two different religions. Following the Timurids, we find that the Safavids overthrow them and rival the Ottomans in the extent and expanse of their empire and their decoration of it. Now we know that the Ottomans, once they conquered Constantinople, were inspired by the Byzantines and of course tried to rival Hagia Sophia with mosques like the Sultan Selim in Edirne. So we find that the Safavids likewise are inspired by the decoration that they conquer and the mosques and their area by the Timurids. Here we have the exterior view of the Masjid Shah in Iran, built between 1611 and 1638, and it serves as a royal mosque, but it is not just the mosque. Instead, an entire area of the center of the city is designed and inspired by the Timurids. Now, for the Timurids in Uzbekistan, we find these double-shell domes were sheathed in blue tiles and were built in an unprecedented scale. However, these were only produced for mausolea by the earlier civilization. And in this case, they're now going to expand that to the entire city. Here we find the modular construction and design set out here in the Masjid Shah example and the massive royal mosque. The exterior of this we can see here is a 90-foot tall portal with those Muqarnas decorating this inset pointed arch. The same types of designs inspired by the earlier Timurids, right, established first by Tamerlane, where we have this interest in bilateral symmetry as well as the blue tile decoration. The designs of the Muqarnas here are also going to be inspired by earlier exchanges with Western Islamic architects and artists. The Sultan Hassan Madrasa Mausoleum and Mosque Complex also provides a very important predecessor for the four-iwan plan, which leaves open these massive sections in 4 different parts, is going to be a great inspiration for this later civilization. So the four-iwan plan, where we have the central courtyards framed by 4 large vaulted halls, will be picked up and carried on here by these architects. Here we have an example of the interior of these four-iwans, whereby we can see how the pointed arches would provide cover for these different areas in the region in North Africa, which gets very little rainfall. Here we have the courtyard as well that adopts the same type of four-iwan plan, but it is much larger, opening up to this massive interior space that even has this type of reflective pool now. The interior continues bringing together these traditions from the culture of the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain to, once again, the local tradition of these blue tiles in the Timurids, and then the four-iwan plan in Cairo and Egypt. The decoration, of course, is still going to draw us to the surface with these abstract vegetal and arabesque motifs, for they appreciate surface decoration and these bright ceramic colors. With the turn of the 20th century came the fall of these Islamic empires, especially during World War I. As they disintegrated, there came a question in these Islamic regions, a question of adopting modern styles that are seen as dominated by the West or non-Islamic cultures, or should they retain the cultural identity that is quite distinct from the West? Well, here at the Mosque and Cultural Center in Rome, built between 1984 and 92, we have an answer to what modern Islamic architecture looks like. Here we're reconciling modernity with Islamic identity, where we have clean modern lines that expose the structure, yet retain the ornament of previous dome-like decorations. Here, we're going to find the 8-pointed star motif is retained, supporting a dome of concentric circles. This references the Mosque at Cordoba and Sinan's domes that we just talked about. Comparing it to the earlier designs that we looked at Cordoba, we can see how it still connects with the past, still is easily identifiable as Islamic in the design and the decoration, yet the clean and elegant lines can be considered modern, thus bringing it into the 20th century. Next class, we'll continue on with South Asian art before 1200 and the spread of Buddhism.